in this lesson, we're going to do the final piece of setup to use Firebase, and that's adding the Firebase packages to our project. After all, the reason Firebase is easy to use is because we're going to be using their classes and their code as a starting point. I'll be showing you how to do this for both Android and iOS in this lesson. The latter part of this lesson is going to include some iOS-specific instructions, so just skip the last part of this lesson if you're developing on Windows. Now, once we've added our iOS and Android apps to Firebase, then it's time to actually incorporate the Flutter packages that will allow us to work with Firebase using Dart. As I mentioned before, there's a whole bunch of Firebase services that we could be using, but in our case, we're only using two of these, which is authentication and Cloud Firestore. So if you click on these links, then it'll take you to the relevant Flutter package on the Dartlang pub page. And whenever you're working with anything from Firebase, you'll always need to start by adding Firebase Core. It's the one that all of these other packages are going to depend on. So let's first install Firebase Core into our pub spec. So let's go into installing, and I'm just going to copy this dependency as it is. And I'm going to be adding it to the pubspec.yaml file. So just below our animated text kit, I'm going to add the Firebase Core, and then we'll add the Firebase auth. Now, at the time when you're looking at this, these numbers might have changed, but just take whatever it is that you see there and you can paste it into our pubspec folder, just so that you get the latest versions. All right, so now that we're done adding all of our dependencies, we're ready to go ahead and hit up packages get to incorporate all of those things into our project. Once that's done, it's really important to test our app on iOS if you're testing on iOS, and also Android. And it's important to test it from a cold start. So we're going to click stop to stop all the processes that are happening, which means that all our apps will exit on Android and on iOS. And now we're going to start with Android, and we're going to click run to build our app from fresh. So after the usual deprecation warnings that we're getting here, we should be getting our APK, which is our Android file, being built. And if we take a look at our emulator, we should be looking at a working version of our app as it is. So this is success. And we're now ready to test the iOS linking up. So it's really important that you test things at this stage, because later on, as we add more code, different things can go wrong. And if you leave it too late, it might just not work. So once you're done with the Android testing, go ahead and choose your iOS simulator or device. And before you hit run, one of the things I recommend you to do is to go into this tab in Android Studio called the terminal. And here we're going to update CocoaPods. Now, in the very, very beginning of the course, we installed CocoaPods, but it's been many, many moons ago, and there might have been a newer version out. So it's really important that after you add those Firebase packages to your pubspec file, that you first do an update on CocoaPods before you run it for iOS. Otherwise, terrible things might happen, and we might have to figure out how to fix it if that is the case. Prevention is better than cure. So first things first, we're going to update our pod repo. So we're going to put pod repo update, and this grabs the latest versions for our CocoaPods. And that might take a little while, but it should be done after a minute or two. Now, the thing I didn't mention is that I'm going to be cutting out and speeding up many parts of this because it can take a while, especially updating CocoaPods. It is something that can be a little bit time consuming, but hey, all good things are worth waiting for, right? Now, once it's done, you should see your prompt, so that $, and the name of your user. So this is now done. And now we're ready to move on to the next step of updating CocoaPods, which is going to be sudo gem install CocoaPods. And this is going to take even longer. And if you're using sudo, which means super user do, we're going to have to enter the admin password. So the password that you use to log on to your Mac to access your computer. Now, because I've already updated very, very recently, it's not doing a lot of work and it finished after about 5 seconds. But this can take anywhere, I've seen in the past students take anywhere between 5 seconds and 5 hours. So it really is something that can take a while. You just have to be patient. It hasn't crashed. Just let it go on until it's done. And once it's done, you'll see your username and the $ or the prompt again. And we're ready to do the final part, which is just to run pod setup. And this should just do all the sort of behind the scenes linking up. And once that's done, it'll tell you that it's done and it'll say setup completed. Now, if at any point during this process you see some red text in here instead of green or yellow or white, then make sure you dive deeper into those error messages or Google for it, or usually they'll give you a hint as to what's going on. But everything going well, there shouldn't be any problems. And we're now ready to shrink down our terminal and go ahead and stop our app and run it on iOS. So let's go ahead and hit run and let's see what happens. So now that's complete, and even though we've got quite a few messages in here coming from the Firebase packages, we've got our app up and running and it's all going well, even if it did take quite a while. Now notice how we're running pod install, and that's Flutter, which is initiating that to be able to install all of these packages as CocoaPods to our iOS app. Now, if you encounter any errors at any point, be sure to refer to the course resources where I'll provide a link to some of the most common errors that you'll see when trying to incorporate Firebase to your Flutter app. And I've got some good solutions for those things. But the best way is just to follow this lesson step by step closely. This is the easiest way to have the smoothest experience. And if you do encounter any issues, it might be worth reviewing the videos and some of those steps that you might have missed out. But once you've confirmed that your app can run from cold start on iOS and Android, if you're testing on both, then you're ready to proceed to the next step where we actually get started registering some of our users. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.